And I think there are a number of reasons why you have all these Christian Zionists. Um, there are people. A lot of these seem to be people with a guilty conscience.
Yep.
Uh, they think that they are responsible for the persecution of Jews, who are the people of Jesus and Paul and so forth, and they have persecuted them. Now, it is true that Christians in earlier periods of time persecuted Jews, in some cases brutally, but this has
Yep.
nothing to do with American Christians or most Christians around, and certainly has nothing to do with evangelical Protestants who have no history of ever persecuting Jews, as far as I know. But they sort of accept. I think there's a very strong guilt ethic.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 257. I'm talking to Paul Gottfried for the third time. He's editor of he's an editor of Chronicles magazine. He's a long time journalist and writer for many conservative publications. He's known a lot of different people over the years. He's a great man, also fluent in German, so he'll certainly, and of course he's I think he still maybe knows some Hungarian too. How are you, Mr. Gottfried?
Okay, fine.
Yeah. So anyway, you've certainly seen a lot of presidential elections over the year. What are some of the things that you might anticipate for Trump coming into as Trump gets ready to take office right now?
Yeah, first of all, I would not underestimate the opposition. And you turn on Fox News or Newsmax, and you hear all the exultant cries of the Republican victors, and they tell you, we've absolutely decimated our enemies and we're on top and so forth. Um, by my reckoning, Trump only won that presidential race, by about a little more than, I think, about 2 million votes. And Democrats pulled out races and senatorial races in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nevada, which the Republicans should have won. I mean, in all three cases. I think the Republicans had much stronger candidates. They had less money, but I think the Democrats were much more effective in getting out the vote. Um, I think one has to keep in mind that the Democrats ran with an extremely weak, almost ludicrous candidate after deposing an incumbent who was totally had suffered from senile dementia. Um, the Republicans, I'm not underestimating Trump as a campaigner. I was vigorous. He was all over the place. Even if he fell behind his opposition in money in terms of fundraising, he certainly was much more visible and much more effective, I thought, than his opponent. But he only won by 2 million votes. So we're saying that the Republicans managed to win in a situation in which the Democrats were holding an extremely weak hand. Um, in another situation, the Democrats might well have pulled out this race, which makes me think that a majority, or almost, I can't say majority, possibly as many as half the Americans, almost half the Americans, we're not all that unhappy with the immigration situation, with having males competing in female sports competitions or using female lockers, or the inflation, or all the other things the Democrats did, because um, they were very much committed to the woke left. And the Democrat Party today is a woke leftist party, which is also the government party, state party. And generally speaking, it does better in elections than the other party, except in certain red states that the Republicans managed to hold on to. So I think that the notion that somehow, Trump has won everything, the Democrats have been decimated, and so forth, I think is uh, a not particularly useful exaggeration.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like there's always been a tendency to exaggerate victories. I mean,
Hmm.
and we certainly can't say that Trump's last president. 2016 was a decisive victory. It really hasn't. There really hasn't been a decisive win for the red team since 1988.
Exactly.
But this was probably more decisive. Of course, there were some seats flipped. I mean, the Senate is at 53 now for the red team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they took Montana and they took West Virginia away from.
And they took Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And Ohio.
I said, for example, that I think we saw the end of what I would call the country Democrats with John Tester and Joe Manchin going out. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, maybe except at the local level, that there are any of those left.
No, I agree. Those people were sort of ready for the chopping block. In the case of Pennsylvania, the victory by McCormick was much closer than it should have been. Casey Jr. has been a largely absentee senator who simply, he hardly ever presents himself in the state, except around election time, and always votes with the Democratic Party and now with the woke Democratic Party. He's probably well to the left of where most of the population in Pennsylvania is. And he was also, as I said, somebody who hardly ever appeared, and when he did, was very inarticulate. I know McCormick was outspent by the Democrats. There was lots of Hollywood, Wall Street money that went to Casey, but I still thought that McCormick should have won this year by a larger margin.
Yeah. This is one interesting thing I've noticed. With Beyonce coming out for Kamala Harris and other people getting involved, do you think anybody really cares what these, or Taylor Swift coming out for Kamala Harris? Do you think anybody really cares what these singers or movie stars or anybody like that says anymore about politics, or do Americans just completely ignore them now?
Yeah, it's sort of hard to determine that. I know the Republicans are very dismissive of this, but there are a lot of younger people, who worship these vocalists and entertainment celebrities, and they might have some kind of influence. I think it's probably marginal by now, I would agree, but I wouldn't write them off entirely. On the other hand, I don't think it was worth spending all the money that Kamala, gave to these stars, the amount of money that she paid to have Oprah Winfrey back her, or have Beyonce appear, and so forth. But on the other hand, I don't think it was entirely useless. I think there are people who are younger people, particularly, who are influenced by celebrity.
Yeah, so that's it. Also, since you live in Pennsylvania and you talked about McCormick, what do you think about your other senator? Although he wasn't on the ballot this time.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how Fetterman, has developed all these fans among Republicans without really doing very much. Just by coming out for Israel, so he picked up, Zionist support. He said that Hamas were terrorists, and they wanted to hear this. So, at least he's distanced himself from the AOC and the Talib wing of the Democratic Party. And he's basically a liberal internationalist in foreign affairs. Which Fox News is. There's perfect harmony between Fetterman's positions in foreign policy and what you hear on Fox News, 24/7. On domestic issues, I'm not sure he's that different from other Democrats. And when he ran the last time, he was associated with the left wing of the Democratic Party. So he's turned out to be less leftist, than we assumed he would be. But I think that's mostly on foreign policy issues.
Yeah, I don't know what. I wonder if it's because of how Fetterman carries himself. I mean, the guy wears a hoodie. Sometimes he's wearing, he's walking around wearing sweatpants. I mean, this is such a, you're so used to seeing all these people wearing suits and ties, and Fetterman has just completely thumbed his nose at all of that. Do you think maybe that's part of the factor here? Just the way he appears, he doesn't seem to care.
Yeah, no, I think there he sort of scores points with, I might say, the younger generation of Democrats. He sort of looks like them. and he seems to be indifferent toward the sartorial standards to which other senators, even someone like Bernie Sanders would conform.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, he's a fairly conventional Democrat, but without the woke perspective on foreign policy.
And I don't know what his other positions are. I remember Ann Coulter compared him to the Kelmex in that Twilight Zone episode called "To Serve Man." I don't know if you are aware of that episode of the Twilight Zone, but I was just laughing so hard when Ann Coulter said that, because she just said that about. She said, he doesn't even look like he's normal. He looks like, saying he doesn't even look like he's from the planet. And so,
No, he does not.
I mean, it's truly remarkable. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Pennsylvania's certainly been a player in politics over the years. I mean, you think about, maybe even the election of 1860. It's interesting to see how the politics goes. I mean, I had I had Cliff Maloney on a while back, and he said, African Americans in Southeast Philadelphia elected Trump. Do you think there's some truth to that, or
Well, they did not vote for him in the same numbers
Yeah,
that they supported Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and other Democrats. But I think the defections that you see are mostly young black males.
yeah,
Obviously, there's the black females are the most reliable base for the left wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, in the United States, bar none, even the suburban white women. So, but among young black men, there has been obvious defection, and I think Trump did pick up 20-something% of the black vote, and I would not surprise me if the blacks voted in much lower numbers this time in southeastern Philadelphia and other urban areas than they did in the past.
yeah. So maybe people, just some of the people who just stayed home, they weren't that enthusiastic. Yeah,
Right,
that could be.
right.
And of course, we could talk about the gap between single women and married women. I mean, that's
Mhm.
huge too.
There is a gap, but you sort of wonder how large a gap it is. The Since the 1990s, over 60% of women identify with the Democratic Party, and it's almost entirely on social issues. Like unlimited abortion rights and gay stuff and so forth. Um, and I'm not quite sure how large a disparity that there is between married and unmarried women. If there is any disparity, I think it would be more in terms of educational level. Women who attend college tend to be on the left, particularly if they major in the humanities or English or something, as opposed to the hard sciences. Um,
Yeah,
women who have sort of terminal high school degrees, tend to be more conservative. By the way, I say this, as a former academic and as a scholar who has a great respect for learning. But I don't think attending a university necessarily, makes you a scholar or gives you a deeper understanding of the world, given the fact that universities are so thoroughly politicized from the woke left these days. And that's where these women undergo, when I say ideological indoctrination, which doesn't necessarily make them more intelligent than women who, with terminal high school degrees, it makes them typically more supercilious, and more committed to a leftist social agenda.
you've been in academia, and you were obviously in college back in the '60s.
Mhm.
What do you think caused all this change? I've heard so many different theories, because political correctness or wokeness is not anything new. This has been really brewing for a long, long time,
Mhm. Mhm.
and people like Thomas Sowell were calling it out 30 years ago.
Yeah, they were calling it out at an early stage. I should say the conservative movement have generally treated these cultural issues like a stepchild. Um, if you turn on Fox News, they do give you something about social issues because they have, evangelicals listening and so forth. Their major concerns are an interventionist, liberal internationalist foreign policy, lately, expressing support for Israel because they're getting a lot of money from former Democratic Zionist donors, and talking about economic issues, having Wall Street people and so forth. But this is generally been the way the conservative movement has operated. And in earlier periods of time, anti-communism was the big thing, right? I mean, opposing the Soviet Union, sniffing out Marxists, stuff like that. I think the woke agenda took the conservative movement almost entirely by surprise. I mean, this is my argument, because the cultural conservatives never really went anywhere. And what I have noticed is the conservative movement has done next to nothing to resist what's going on until some of their donors complain about DEI or the Hamas is anti-Semitic or something like that. Generally, they don't care. They also oppose. They've also opposed abortion, on demand or something. But even their anti-abortion positions have become weaker and weaker over time. So they've gone along with gay marriage, with which they're perfectly cool right now, and even transgendered, as long as they're adult transgendered, not children who are being transitioned. Um, I don't think there's been much pushback by the so-called conservative establishment. Uh, but I think you're right. Soul did see something culturally amiss a long time ago, although the major thrust of his work was fighting socialism. But he did at least peripherally discuss the cultural issues. Um, but I would agree with you. I think wokeness, we see as wokeness, was already implicit in other social causes going back at least to the 1960s, even 1950s. Um, one of the things for which I have been absolutely banned by the conservative movement for saying is that the civil rights revolution was absolutely essential for the unfolding of wokeness in the United States. I mean, it empowered government agencies to scrutinize our motives for picking people to work for us or to associate with. It became more and more involved in our private associations, and it was always fighting something called prejudice or discrimination. And the target simply expanded over time. It sort of went from blacks and women to gays to transgendered and so forth, with more and more government intervention, of course, at every stage, and government intervention at the state and local as well as federal levels. So when I say what we've witnessed is what I call an incremental revolution, but it starts in the 50s and 60s and simply becomes sort of widens its target, and expands its power, in the ensuing 40 or 50 years. But going back to my time in graduate school, in the mid 19 late 1960s when I was at Yale. Um, some of the causes which later became uh, fundamental for the woke movement were already there. But I thought the most important target at the time was anti-communism. It was attacking the United States as reactionary and defending the socialist revolutionary countries, that sort of thing. Once the Cold War, wound down and this sort of stuff, it then became possible for the left to turn itself entirely or focus entirely on this, what became the woke agenda.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can't. I think it might have been you that said something like you had a professor back in the '60s who said something like, "Well, I'm not worried about all these hippies protesting; it will all pass."
Well, I don't know. I never much liked the hippies. I found them distasteful,
Yeah,
but I don't think they were major actors in what happened. I think it's public administration, which I stress in my book After Liberalism, which becomes very important. I mean, they basically take over democracy.
yeah,
Becomes identified with public. It's the growth of government in every Western country, public administration, and the colonization of the family by government administrators. I think there is this administrative takeover, together with the rise of woke ideology, and they become fused. It's what I call intersectional technocracy. It's the
Yeah, there
future.
could definitely be something, like a
Yeah.
growth of the woke ideology. But also, as some people pointed out too, that because the number of college professors grew so much that they had to hire new professors, and that
Hmm.
was where
Hmm.
some of these new woke professors came in, and eventually, they just outnumbered them because I believe from 1965 to 1975, the number of college professors doubled, and
But
other,
I think there was something else at work here. You have an expanding student base for a very long time. And most of those new students they bring in, this was my experience, were not capable of doing serious college work. But everybody had a human right to go to something called college and have college experience.
yeah,
And they also had to hire people to teach courses that the students were able, to deal with, and the sociology of women or the oppression of blacks or something became majors, and other fields, particularly in the social sciences, dumbed down their requirements, in order to accommodate a larger, what do we say, a customer base.
yes,
I've compared universities to, to Howard Johnson or something. I mean, they just basically became commercial enterprises, trying to pick up customers. So I think a lot of what we see as the woke degeneration of higher education, at least in its early stages, had to do with creating courses that would be agreeable to students who really did not come to do serious college work. They weren't going to study calculus or ancient Greek or
yeah,
whatever. So you had to offer them things that they were happy doing, so they would come to your institution and have their parents fork out $80,000 so they can stay there, and we'll have the government fork out money in the end. So I think this is important for the initial phase. You also get universities or academic professions become magnets for people with all sorts of sexual problems later on. That was my observation. And these were jobs that gave you tenure. You didn't have to work that hard, and you had time to devote to your weird lifestyles. So I think there were a number of factors that coalesce to turn universities into this. Um, the, uh, the most serious takeover by the left is obviously the elite universities, the Ivy League universities, the better state
yeah,
universities, and so forth, better colleges. And they managed to do this as well. And part of this, of course, is a dumbing down of traditional standards, and the hiring of people who are in these sort of fake disciplines. I think it's very important. Although some of the same attitudes will then, migrate to more serious disciplines. So you get, transgendered physics or something like that in the end. But I think there are many causes. There are multiple causes which have produced this very distasteful outcome.
yeah. There's a lot of different causes here at play. Sometimes I wonder if if this all would have happened. Would any of this have happened if there'd not been a Vietnam War? Because so much of it just seemed
Hmm.
response to the Vietnam War, but there was also the Civil Rights Movement.
And
Yeah,
even before that, of course, there was the granting of paid education to veterans of the Second World War, which will vastly expand the pool of college students, many of whom are quite worthy, but then, it sort of opens up the door and then more and more are going to come in. And the government becomes more and more involved in higher education, basically subsidizing college students.
yeah. That's another one of those things that came out of World War II. I mean, I think culturally, World War II was such a disaster for this country
Hmm.
because you look at things like that, income tax withholding, the GI Bill,
Hmm.
employer based health insurance, and just there were so many other things that indirect results of World War II that you never you might call them side effects of fighting the war that just we didn't have the same country after World War II. It wasn't even close.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
And of course, what I write about is another effect of World War II, which is the perpetual war against fascism. even when
Yes.
fascism doesn't exist. It just becomes a vehicle for punishing the right or people who are not politically correct.
Well, another thing that happened after World War II is what I would call was the entire invention of the teenager. I mean, it seemed like,
Right.
you were, I mean, before, there were lots of men who served in World War II that only had eighth grade educations, and it wasn't that uncommon to just go to the eighth grade. I mean, high school was like college for some, but now and I don't know,
It was, in fact,
yeah.
the whole educational system becomes dumbed down so that, you
Oh
have
yeah.
people going to college who can't read and write. And now, uh,
Yeah.
you have to have remedial courses for them. These are things that should have been taught in elementary school.
And I also find it kind of funny. Stephen Hicks once commented about how Germany in the 1920s was the most, quote, educated, unquote, society of all time. And I said, well, what did they do with, they went to all these schools and had all these fancy degrees, and what did the Germans do with that? The 1920s
Right,
Germans do
right.
with that? Oh, they all got behind Hitler. Well, that was just,
Well, of course, that is the argument the left uses, that they were all educated but with the wrong things. So we
yeah.
have to do is re-educate them, and then educate, Americans and Englishmen, everybody else, to be politically correct. That's one of the
Yeah,
arguments they typically use, that the Germans would. However, I
exactly.
point out that even during the height of the Depression, only about one-third of the Germans ever voted for the Nazi Party. And the people who voted for the Nazi Party, most of them voted for them for economic reasons. So that, I mean, you compare that to what happened in the United States. I think during the George Floyd riots, something like
Yeah.
65% of American people expressed their support for BLM.
Yeah, there's without the Depression, there's no Hitler, but there were a lot of dictatorships that probably wouldn't have sprung up without the
Right.
Depression.
Mhm.
So, getting back, we've seen this happen before. There's been talk, of the Department of Government Efficiency, and I talked with a gentleman who was on, a couple days ago, and he talked about, back in the 80s, there was what was called the Grace Commission, where
Mhm.
some people are going to look at, all these things. What do you think is do you think anything good is going to come out of the Department of Government Efficiency, or?
Yeah, I think it's very problematic. It depends on the end. What President Trump will be able to do by executive action. Uh, Obviously, the Democrats are not going to go along with most of this unless they can cut away programs that benefit the other party, um, or that
Yeah.
benefit the right. There are also lots of Republicans, who depend on this pork in order to stay in office. So, and then on top of that, of course, most of the spending is not discretionary spending, as we know. It goes to entitlement programs that the people do
Yeah.
not want to touch, and which Donald Trump promised not to touch. So you wonder, the major beneficial effect, in my opinion, is they might help, you know, um, get rid of government, some of the government bureaucrats, phase out the Department of Education, and so, which of course the Democrats will never allow to happen because it's like a major propaganda vehicle for the Democrats and for the woke left. Um, but I think if they can manage to get rid of departments, some of the departments of government, to streamline these, and my wildest dream is to have these people move to, I don't know, Amarillo, Texas. You can relocate government workers in order to get rid of the swamp in Washington. There is a swamp there. That would be fine. But I really wonder how much of the government fat these people will be able to get rid of, unless they can depend on President Trump using executive power to do so.
Yeah, I suppose then there's only so much you can do with executive power, and the problem with executive power, though, is if the president can do all this, can cut all this stuff now, the next president can just as easily bring it all back.
Absolutely. The Democrats will
Which,
bring it back in 5 minutes. Yeah. Because they're the party of government workers. They're the state
yeah,
party.
yeah, this is the one thing that's changed too, and it's a problem everywhere, is you've got all these government employee unions, which now form the backbone of. I mean, they're about the only. I mean, I don't know very many people at all that are, in a private sector union. But
No,
there's
I mean at least in the industrial unions
yeah,
have dwindled in power. If you notice, Trump did not hesitate to name as his commerce secretary somebody who is who fronts for big industrial unions, who supports them, and
yeah,
who's even in favor of closed shop. The and may have done this with the advice of the president of the Teamsters, who was very clear, whose support he tried uh, to elicit during the campaign. But the Republican government will, it doesn't even care about fighting these industrial unions anymore. And they even though they're theoretically for the open shop and the tap law and so forth, they're not going to push, I don't think, very hard in that direction because they want these industrial workers to vote for them. In any case, the industrial unions are really not not spearheading the union movement, as you said. It's the public sector unions, which now have all the power and which are firmly allied to the left.
yeah, they've always been firmly aligned with the left. I mean,
Hmm.
the biggest one by far, of course, that's firmly aligned with the left would be, the misnamed National Education Association,
Right. Which is
which
not
of course,
surprising.
yeah, and and I don't know if they have as much. Obviously, they have some influence at the federal level, but you want to talk about also. This is a union that is in almost every state legislature.
Mhm.
Uh,
That is correct.
yeah,
That is correct. And they not only want more money for their employees, but they also push a woke ideological agenda, thanks to Randy Weingarten and other, leaders
oh
of
yes,
this public sector union.
yeah, they've got their agendas that they push all the way
Mhm.
down, and I think really that's people don't pay that much attention to what their state governments are doing, but those what they're doing can be
Mhm.
absolutely huge.
Right.
Uh, so what do you think? For example, about you know, uh, I do wonder too. That maybe the Department of Government Efficiency, will cut some pennies here and there, but they won't cut the dollars, and the dollars are
Mhm.
the big things that you really need to cut. It's
I agree. No, I just don't see them doing that because most spending is entitlement. It's not discretionary
yeah,
spending, and you're going to get the Democrats fighting them tooth and nail. The they might be able to take some of the money that Biden earmarked for his own constituencies, pretending he's saving the country by doing this, and which has not yet been spent or allocated, and take that money back. I mean, I see them doing this, but this is something that Trump would do in any case.
so yeah, I do wonder also, if what about some of the regulatory burden getting cut? I mean, that I think that's probably more costly to our economy right now than some of the spending that we have, although it's all pretty costly.
Yeah, but it's very hard to get rid of it. I mean, the money that goes to entitlements like
Yeah,
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, it's going to be very hard to even touch those things.
yeah,
If you remember, some of the Republicans were suggesting raising the age, uh, the retirement age for collecting Social Security from 65 to 70, and Trump vehemently opposed that. Is because they're taking it basically wants to pick up the 65 to 70-year-old vote. So it's going to be very hard to touch any of that entitlement spending.
yeah. I don't know how they'll fight any of it either. And
Mhm.
a few other things, too. Where do you think Trump is going to go on foreign policy? Because the one thing that he's always been consistent on for his whole political life is he's always been in favor of favoring Israel. Where do you think what do you think is going to happen with
Well,
Israel?
that would be the same. In fact, he's going to dig in that position. If you look at the people whom he uh, sent to the relevant foreign policy positions, he has Stefanik, who is a big Israel champion, as the UN ambassador. Then he has Mike Huckabee, who is a fanatical Christian Zionist, as the
Yeah,
ambassador to Israel. Right down the list. I mean, and of course, Rubio is very, very pro-Israel. So he would be that as Secretary of State. Uh, no, I don't think there'll be any any change there. In fact, he probably will make a stronger attempt to shore up his Zionist base, and of course they give him a lot of money, so he's going to stay with them. And there has been if you notice, a movement, of Democratic Zionists, into the Trump Republican camp, since last October, and he's going to try to hold on to that base and to expand it. I think, though, he might make he will make an effort to end the Russian-Ukrainian war. The question is exactly what will Putin give up, in return for making peace with Ukraine, and what will Zelensky give up? So I think that's going to be a very hard nut to crack. I think he's serious, by the way, about going after the Hamas people who were not released at the Israeli hostages. Some of the American hostages are really so-called are Israelis who spend part of their time in the United States, but nonetheless, what was done to them is absolutely outrageous, and I think he is, taking if you want action, you really have to go out, and they don't know, Hamas, whether he's going to bomb the hell out of them, in the end, because unlike Biden, this guy is unpredictable. Biden was a predictable wuss, unless he was pushing a woke agenda or putting Republicans in jail. Trump could be, could be a war-happy lunatic. They don't quite know. So I think he'll get his way with Hamas. I think they will turn those hostages. Um, I really don't see that much of a change in foreign policy in terms of what's actually being done, except that I think most world leaders know that Trump is uh, much less conciliatory and much less willing to give in, to the demands of the other side than Biden and Blinken. And I think they're going to have to they're simply going to have to prepare for that. I mean, the way he was received in France when he went to the reopening of Notre Dame, I think was indicative of how world leaders are going to treat him. They really do see him as a tough guy, and I think this gives him a definite advantage in dealing with other world leaders.
Well, yeah, and to his credit is one thing I've said about Trump. If you knock Trump down, he gets back up. I mean,
Mhm.
I think that picture with him holding up his fist, people are going to know what that picture means 100 years from now. I mean,
No, I think you're right. And the way
yeah,
he came back from defeat, they were going to put him in jail. They took him off the
yeah,
ballot and so forth. And he won. I mean, he won as decisively as any Republican can win,
yeah.
given the political culture of the country now. But, he won. He did extremely well in the Electoral College. And this despite the fact that the legacy media were, equating him with Hitler 24/7.
On one side, you have Trump raising his fist in the air, and yet, on the other side, you have this guy who looks like a combination of Homer Simpson and Curly from the Three Stooges. I mean, it's just so. What in the world? I mean, I think I think Walls might have repelled more men than Harris did.
I agree with you. I mean, and
Yeah,
then they discover that he's putting, tampons in women's restrooms, and of course declaring women's restrooms to be open to men as well. Uh, yeah, no, I agree. I think Waltz was a disastrous choice. That's another factor that we have to consider in understanding why Kamala lost. Aside from the fact that she was probably the weakest candidate the Democrats ever ran for the presidency.
yeah, she wasn't. And she wasn't very personable. I mean, I said many times, the biggest deal breaker for me with Harris was I will not vote for anybody who bends the rules as a prosecutor to put people in jail or bends the
Mhm.
rules to keep them in jail. That to me it bothers me that more Americans didn't care about an issue like that. It's because that's huge. But
Or more Americans care for her, didn't care about her support for supporting the riots.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I mean, she came out support of the riots.
yeah,
And you say, well, you know, Trump really was behind January 6th. Well, here's a woman who came out in open support of riots, and besides doing work to bail out of jail people who were committing acts of violence, they could commit more acts of violence at the time.
yeah,
Yet this didn't seem to phase her voters. You know, she picked up 70, 80 million votes, which to me
yeah,
is scary. I mean, the fact that so many Americans voted, you know, for such a problematic, dubious candidate who spoke in word salads, showed absolutely no intelligence, you know, and had a record of supporting extreme woke positions and violence. You know, support inciting violence
yeah.
during the George Floyd riots.
Yeah, I don't know how you. It's just it makes me scratch my head when you have a movement when your heroes are people like George Floyd, Jordan Neely, and you look at
Right now, Luigi Mangione is a new
yeah
hero.
who want to who don't want to prosecute shoplifters up to $1,000
Right,
and stuff.
right,
I mean, I when you hear things like Walgreens is completely pulling out of San Francisco, and
yeah.
I mean, as somebody pointed out, if the blue team wants to take back and win back America, what they could do is they need to figure out a way to make their cities these big cities just immaculate, beautiful places.
But then it's not going to happen because the
Yeah,
people who are destroying them have the votes of the majority of the population there. You know, I mean, this is something that the conservative movement refuses to recognize. Now, this is the people are this. The people are angry. Well, why the hell did the people vote for Gavin Newsom? Why did they vote for Alvin Bragg? And they do. You know, and Alvin Bragg is going to be reelected as the as district attorney in Manhattan. I mean, if
yeah,
unless there's some unexpected turnabout by the voters, but you have to recognize that almost half the American population support this junk that we're complaining about, and that to me is a very scary thing. You know, I mean, and it's going to be very hard to turn them around unless they themselves are attacked by the migrants they're letting into the country. You know, if they're raped and houses are burned down, maybe then you'll change their mind. But I know many woke Democrats, and you know they are totally committed to their side. I doubt they really believe that Trump is Hitler, but you know they're quite willing to say that if it helps them win elections. They do support wokeness. They're not unhappy with the immigration policy that was pursued by Biden, and you know they understand that this is necessary to create a democratic one-party state in the United States. That you know enfranchise all these illegals who are coming in. There are a lot of people who think this way. They totally support the woke agenda, transitioning children. This is fine with them. And you know, I think it's very important to understand the size and the danger, you know, of the leftist opposition in this country. And the same opposition exists, by the way, in Germany, France, England, Spain, right to the list of European countries. And you know, they're people with the same mindset. And they, you know, in some cases, they're the majority of the population. And the question is, how can you save societies when people think like this?
yeah. I really don't know how you do either. It's a you mentioned Mike Huckabee and Marco Rubio. Does it seem like the Christian Zionists are actually more militaristic than the Jewish Zionists?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
No, and American Zionists are more militant than Israeli patriots.
and it really and really doesn't make a lot of sense because I the biggest loser in everything that's been done in the Middle East in the last 20 years
Are the Christians?
is Christians.
Well, yeah, but they don't see it that way.
Yeah.
And I think there are a number of reasons why you have all these Christian Zionists. Um, there are people. A lot of these seem to be people with a guilty conscience.
Yeah.
Uh, they think that they are responsible for the persecution of Jews, who are the people of Jesus and Paul and so forth, and they have persecuted them. Now, It is true that Christians in earlier periods of time persecuted Jews, in some cases brutally, but this
Yeah,
has nothing to do with American Christians or most Christians around, and certainly has nothing to do with evangelical Protestants who have no history of ever persecuting Jews, as far as I know. But they sort of accept. I think there's a very strong guilt ethic among evangelicals, particularly, and they feel that they have treated Jews badly in the past, and they have to make up for this. And many of them also, accept Old Testament teaching seriously, that God will reward those who honor, or those who are nice to His chosen people, and the Jews in their mind remain the chosen people who have been unfairly persecuted by Christians. So this is the way many of them think. I don't think that has much to do with dispensationalism. I mean, there are dispensationalists who are also
yeah,
pro-Israel because of the end times. Most Christian Zionists I know are not dispensationalists. I doubt Mike Huckabee is a dispensationalist. Or the most of these other, they're just very philo-Semitic. That someone like Michelle Bachmann, who raises money for poor Jews in Israel, goes there. She's a devout evangelical, and so forth. Many of these people are extremely well-meaning, nice people. I must say I like them, but they are crazy when it comes to the Middle East. And I've listened to Mike Huckabee a few weeks ago, and he said that the use of the word West Bank is anti-Semitic. We should speak about Judea and Samaria, which, of course, the ultra-right Zionists, that's their term to refer to the West Bank. But these people do take a very, very strong Zionist position, and Israel is the country they love more than the United States. So it's going to be very hard to change this. And by the way, the Israelis do everything they can to cultivate them. Unlike American Jews who really don't like Christians very much for the most part and identify them with anti-Semitism, the Israelis absolutely adore evangelicals. They welcome them, they wine and dine them, and so forth. So they understand they're their best friends in the United States. But many of them very clearly take an extravagant position. Extravagantly pro-Israel position. The other thing that I've argued is that some of the most bizarre outre forms of Zionism in America seem to come from neoconservatives and Republicans, not Israelis. I mean,
yeah,
the Israelis generally have gone along with what their supporters in the United States say because they're dependent on them. They're a small country. They're surrounded by enemies. But the most Israelis oppose the Iraqi invasion. I mean, I thought it was bad. Majority of Israelis, but they went along with it because the neoconservatives in the United States
yeah.
thought it was good for Israel.
It, I often say that I think maybe Americans would be less gung ho about war if they actually had a war happen here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because I think yeah, that's one thing I've always often said about Putin. Putin was born after the end of World War II,
Mm-hmm.
so he has there's no, but the guys like Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko,
Right.
and even Gorbachev, they had a memory of World War II,
Yes.
and so they said, well, this war thing really is harmful. You really don't want. So I wonder if maybe just because Americans haven't had a war happen on their soil since 1865, they just don't really think about war
And,
as
and,
being.
and even that war was a war,
Yeah,
to the sections of the country, right? They were not. It was
yeah,
not a foreign invader that were coming in.
yeah. And I think thinking about the term West Bank, would Mike Huckabee be offended if I said Arkansas is the West Bank of the Mississippi? It is.
He
You know,
probably that would be more permissible because the United
yeah,
States is not as holy as Israel. Right.
yeah. Geez, you probably hear people use it. I mean, the West Bank of the Nile or the West Bank of the Ohio or
Yeah.
there's, but yeah, but they call it the West Bank. Well, yeah. So this has been a good talk. You mentioned you didn't really couldn't do much more than an hour, so I don't want to take up much of your time because you had your injury a few weeks ago. I hope it works
Right.
out for you. Yeah,
No, I'm sure it will. I'm sitting here with my leg in a brace, and raised on a platform. But I hope this will not be the situation the next time we meet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been great having you on here. Where can we find you out there on the net?
Well, if you look under Paul Gottfried or Chronicles magazine,
Yes,
and
Chronicles
we
Magazine.
need subscribers to our magazine. We are really hurting for subscribers right now. You know, we would urge you to subscribe. It is an excellent magazine. I think it has the best content of any magazine dealing with politics. You know, and I urge all of your listeners to try our magazine.
Yes, and well, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, check out my Substack, go to buymeacoffee.com. Thank you,
By
Paul
the way,
Godfrey.
I'm not supposed to say that we're hurting for subscribers. I'm supposed to sound more triumphant. Uh,
Yes,
and I think there has been a bump up in our subscriptions, but we can do it with a lot more bumps up. So please subscribe.
and also gift subscriptions. You know, you haven't figured out
They're great. For
something
Christmas.
to get your you haven't figured out what to get your person. Maybe give them a gift subscription. So yes, thank you, Paul Godfrey. This is the end of the Fountainhead Forum. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.